All right, time for another Bearded Wonder Explains. This time we're talking about the government that matters and why it is normally ignored. So, when we talk about the government, normally we're talking about the national government. A lot of people pay attention to the president, and that's probably a good thing. He is the leader of the free world and all of those fancy titles that we give him. He commands the U.S. military, which has a lot of jets and other things like that. Uh, Typically, we tend to think that the national government has a lot of power. Then we talk about the state governments. Every once in a while, we pay attention to them, especially during coronavirus with mask mandates and other things like that. So we kind of feel like, yeah, your state kind of has some laws, and they can make some pretty cool speed limits if they want to. And if you're not being careful in some places like Virginia, where they lower the speed limit a lot, that can be kind of annoying. And then local government, we really only pay attention to every once in a while. Most people don't really bother. They tend to feel like the local government doesn't count. That kind of makes sense because when we think about the power of the president and the power of the mayor of Fort Mill, for example, we tend to think that the president would have a lot more power. And basically, we're thinking about, which one would cancel the other one if they both tried to make their own laws. So if Fort Mill makes a law and the President of the United States makes a law, which one's going to cancel the other one? And of course, normally it's going to be the national government canceling the local government's law. The problem is that we tend to ignore the fact that usually the local governments are the ones that make more laws. In other words, they're the ones that determine a lot of stuff that actually impacts you. A lot of the laws that the national government make, they may apply to you in some random situation, but they're not going to have as much power over your daily experience as your local government does. And the reason for that is because the local government makes way more laws. And those laws almost all affect you. The national government's going to make a lot less laws and leave a lot of things up to the smaller governments because they just don't care or have time to make the law about what happens to cornfields after October 1st. But your local government does, and the people there care, and so they tend to make more laws. Also, you have a whole lot more power in your local government based on how many people vote. For example, in the state of South Carolina, 2.5 million people voted for president in 2020. And about 242,000 people voted for our congressional representative. But when you break that out by national representation, South Carolina gets 9 out of 538 votes for president in the Electoral College. That's 1.6%. And if we divide your 1 out of 2.5 million times the 1.6% that total vote counts for, you get this abysmally small number, which is basically nothing. When we look at governor in the state of South Carolina, still not a whole lot better, although that number is probably like 1,000 times bigger. Still a pretty small number. But then you look at the state House of Representatives compared to Congress. So in Congress, we get one representative for our 242,000 votes out of 435 congressmen and congresswomen. In the state House, we vote in Fort Mill 29,000 votes in the last election, and that person was 1 out of 124. You should start to see that the numbers are much more favorable. As a matter of fact, you have about 40 times more power voting for your state representative versus the congressional representative in the national government. Mayor? There were 2,425 votes for Fort Mill mayor the last time that we voted for that. That's a number that we can almost say. Your 1 out of that many votes is going to give you a percentage that's a lot more impressive. Maybe an easier way to represent this is just to think about how many votes you need to get in order to win an election. For president, You need about 81 million. That's all, just 81 million. Get yourself and 81 million of your friends together, and you can be the next president of the United States. You want to be governor of the state of South Carolina, you only need about 800,000. That's way less than 81 million. And if you want to be mayor of Fort Mill, about 1,400. What that should show you is that you actually have a shot at getting elected to a local office, which also means that people care a lot more about getting your vote, which means that they're willing, even if you don't want to be the mayor, the people who do are going to be far more likely to listen to you. Because if you've got you and 140 friends, that's 10% of the votes that they need to win an election. They're going to give you some time, and they're going to listen to what's important to you. And so, as far as where you are a more powerful constituent, it is far more likely for you to actually influence a local government election. Also, and we alluded to this earlier, just think about all of these laws. For example, if you've got woods sitting next to your house and somebody wants to bulldoze it in order to put houses there, if you tried to write a letter to the president because you're all concerned about them bulldozing those woods, you don't want that to happen, I got some news for you. Joe Biden ain't going to care, and it's not because he's a Democrat or because Donald Trump is a Republican. It's just that if he needs 81 million votes to care, he's got bigger problems than whether they knock down the woods that are behind your house or not. Things like the Taliban and other stuff like that. Even the governor of South Carolina is probably not going to care unless they're really important woods or something else like that. The mayor, however, is going to care a lot, and not only that, but if you've got 10 neighbors who also don't want that cut down, pretty soon you're going to actually be able to affect those laws and stop those things from happening. And so that's really kind of the way that works. You think about all of the things that are happening just in the town of Fort Mill. For example, besides just knocking down woods to build, Harris Teeters or whatever the case is, you've got the fact that we are learning this way. This is not a state law. This is something that this school district decided to offer, which means it was a local election. You have local businesses, and a lot of times the policies that places make have a lot to do with whether those businesses are successful or not. And the police, literally the fact that you get or don't get arrested oftentimes comes down to whether the local officers care. And your local government has control of those people. It's very rare for a state trooper to arrest somebody for a small crime that happens. And so if you and your people really feel like the government's being a little bit too aggressive arresting people and other things like that, a lot of times just by voting for different sheriffs, you can change those, even state laws. Stop being enforced by local police if you put enough pressure on the town and everything else for those kinds of issues. And so it's really this situation where your power is the greatest in the local government because the people care, because there are far less people voting, and because of those realities, the government is just far more likely to listen to you. But because we pay attention to which law would hypothetically cancel the other laws. If the president said you can't knock down those woods, this is a presidential order, it would cancel whatever your local law was. Probably. The fact is, though, the president doesn't have time to care about that kind of stuff, and neither does the state government, and so most of these issues get handled by the local government. And because most people tend to ignore those elections, there are less people voting in them. And because of that reality, plus the fact that it's just a smaller area that we're dealing with, those are the elections where you actually have power. And they're also the elections that most people tend to completely ignore. That's it for us today. Hope you have a good day.